Alright, so what video should I do next? Yeah, I don't know. Just no ideas right now. Let's go on Twitter and see if I can get some inspiration or some shit. Oh? Jujutsu Kaisen's opening is out already? Neat. Let's give it a look. Yeah, so, Jujutsu Kaisen started airing, and while this is one of those adaptations I've been looking forward to for ages, let's forget all that shit for a moment and focus on just one part of the anime, the first opening. Would I say I exploded into a volcano of cum upon seeing this opening and its gorgeous visuals? Yes, I would, because this opening is phenomenal and I am suddenly very British. Directed by Shingo Yamashita, who you may know from the Great North vs. Pain fight and also one of the openings whose number I can't remember right now, this OP is an absolute marvel befitting of a Shonen Jump hit. Now, as any manga reader will tell you, Jujutsu Kaisen is a series that is densely packed with visual references and parables, so naturally the OP would follow suit and be ripe with cool references and just a lot of cinematographic competences. So, because I am very excited and also a fucking nerd, let's go through this and analyze it real quick. There are many ways an OP can be structured. Some can focus on specific characteristics, characters, or even tell self-contained stories. In Jujutsu Kaisen's case, it doesn't do either, and instead chooses to go the classic anime route of just showing us some cool shit that summarizes the series and its appeal. And that's perfectly fine. Jujutsu Kaisen has had a notoriously frustrating road to becoming an anime and having its details clarified, kinda like another high-profile show by MAPPA, but whatever. So I am perfectly happy with the OP being a luxurious love letter to fans who have been waiting to see these characters in motion for so long. Do I think any of this had any influence in the decision-making when Yamashita was crafting this OP? Of course not. Japan doesn't care for our opinions, but I'm just saying why I'm okay with this OP not having an overt internal narrative. Alright, enough of this dumb shit, let's get to analyzing. Oh, one more thing, I'll be spoiling the shit out of Jujutsu Kaisen, because proper analysis, while being prohibited from talking about certain content, is impossible and frankly pointless. You have been warned. The OP starts with the red marks of Ryumen Sukuna illuminating the dark, which are quickly drowned out by an awakening Yuji sitting in a flooded metro train, where he is poked by a single fish swimming through the water. Immediately, this setting has an intrinsic surrealist quality. The train is clearly operational and still running, as evidenced by the moving scenery in the background, yet it is flooded with water, enough to have a tropical fish swim in it. This already clues us into the kind of world that Jujutsu Kaisen builds, one where the bizarre, the unreal, and at times the monstrous exist alongside and on top of the mundane. Additionally, it already starts building up a few power dynamics. For example, it isn't Yuji who starts the OP, it's Sukuna. Our main character doesn't get to herald the arrival of his own series, it's stolen from him by his demonic co-inhabitant / foil. This immediately establishes the ravenous and controlling nature of Sukuna, which is contrasted by him actually not appearing much in this OP aside from the final moments. This contrast rounds out their relationship. Yes, Sukuna is trying his best to derail and control Yuji's sanity and body, but Yuji is so far successful at resisting, so much so that while he doesn't get to start the OP, he gets to inhabit it as himself, not as Sukuna's puppet body. And lastly, this setting establishes the story direction and narrative, at least slightly. Trains in media are often symbolic for a journey, an adventure the characters go on that changes them. However, look at how Yuji is sitting. Not parallel to his journey, not facing the direction he's headed in, but perpendicular, facing us, asleep and lethargic. This, coupled with the water, might be a nod to how Yuji is often at the mercy of forces outside of his control, be it Sukuna, his deranged but awesome mentor Gojo, or the murderous higher-ups of Jujutsu society. He is swept away and carried along by the currents, represented by both the water and his passive position in the train. Alright, I know we've spent way too long in this one scene, but there is one last thing we gotta talk about. The fish. You could pretty much interpret anything you want into this since it's so freeform, but I am pretty convinced that this fish represents Junpei, arguably Jujutsu Kaisen's most tragic character. The first reason I believe this is because Junpei is the only character in this series who is associated with an aquatic animal, his jellyfish familiar. Additionally, this is a tropical fish in an urban environment. Not only is it separated from the other characters on accounts of being a fucking fish and therefore constrained to water, but it is also affected by a paradigmatic or categorical divide. The OP and the series in general takes place in an urban setting, in the paradigm of the metropolis. This fish, however, evokes the paradigm, the category of the exotic, of the tropical reefs and jungles. These two imageries are incompatible, just like the fish is incompatible with the urban setting where he would perish. So what we have here is an entity lost in a world it doesn't understand, a space that is unaccommodating, foreign and even hostile to it and its needs. These are pretty much the exact feelings Junpei harbors towards his own surroundings, as a result of bullying and his own bleak worldview. So the fish that nudges Yuji awake here represents the character that, narratively, truly awakens Yuji to his role as a Jujutsu sorcerer. But more on this metaphor later. For now, let's just move on from this train. We cut to the title card, which is imposed over a nightly sky shot of a city, whose streets light up with the red taillights from the cars driving through it. Seems simple enough, but again, MAPPA manages to pack a lot into this. For starters, this isn't just any cityscape. This is Shibuya, Tokyo's big commercial district, and, as any manga readers surely know, an area that is very important to Jujutsu Kaisen's plot later down the line. Then, as the streets start to turn red from the car lights, they begin resembling arteries and veins pumping blood. Blood is a huge part of Jujutsu Kaisen, both literally, as much of it is spilled in this totally for kids please don't sue us shonen manga, and figuratively, as many characters are trapped by the ties of their family, chained to the identity of their blood. Now, I want you to notice that not every street turns red. In fact, there's this conspicuous blob in the middle where the streets remain pretty dark. This negative space is, to me at least, clearly forming the shape of a heart. Not the emoji, but the anatomical shape, laid sideways. You can make out shapes that might denote the aorta, the superior vena cava, and the pulmonary artery respectively. This is maybe a bit abstract, but considering the very clear blood vessel visuals, it fits. So this all comes together to create the idea that the blood shed in preparation and in the potential aftermath of the Shibuya incident forms the heart of the series. But because this is the biological heart, not the iconographic one, the OP clues us into the fact that this might not be a characteristic tale of friendship and cooperation, but rather one that looks at things with a slightly more cynical, grotesque lens, which I think is really appropriate for the kind of show this is. I am going to breeze through these next few shots because A, they're mostly there to show off the cool character designs, and B, this video is definitely getting too long for a spontaneous exercise in hype. We get a few small symbolic hints, like Nobara walking out of the shade into the sun, symbolizing her leaving her shadowed existence of a hillbilly and entering the spotlight of both the cast and the big city. Or Nanami sitting in a very well-furnished but lifeless living room, exemplifying his paradoxical system of values and worldviews. I do want to highlight this bit with Maki real quick. Using her diegetic inability to see curses as a cinematographic tool to transition into the existence of said curses is such a brilliant use of the story as a medium for visuals. Simple, but insanely cool. Also, one thing I want to point out is that the curse she's seeing isn't one that actually appears as such in the series. Instead, it holds pretty crazy resemblance to Naobito Zenin, the patriarch of the Zenin family, and the originator of many of the troubles Maki faces. So this curse bearing his likeness could be a nod to the family that haunts her life, much like a curse would, which would be a super cool reference. The next shot features the best character in this show, Satoru Gojo, standing on top of the Tokyo Skytree, overlooking the night city. This one has a bit more to unpack. For one, let's consider the setting. While the OP includes varying levels of elevation, no one is shown to be quite as high as Gojo is here, which is made to communicate just how above the rest he is in terms of power. It is no exaggeration to say that Gojo is the strongest character in his entire series, and one of the strongest characters out of any show currently running. But this isn't all. Look at how the setting rotates around him. This tells us that the world of Jujutsu Kaisen literally revolves around Gojo. which is absolutely true since, thanks to his tremendous strength, his birth was classified as an historic event because of how much it upset the power balance of the sorcerer world. And lastly, it's not just the setting that revolves around Gojo, but the camera, and therefore our gateway into the story, does too. Much of the story is centered around the villains basically desperately finding ways to remove Gojo from fights, since the moment he steps into battle is the moment he wins. So the camera revolving around him is a very well-made way to symbolize that. The next sequence is another thick one, so let's go through it step by step. Yuji's train ride is interrupted by Sukuna appearing in his reflection. This shows us that Yuji can never escape the clutches of his demonic spirit, since a reflection is an intangible and inevitable aspect of ourselves we simply cannot escape. We see more of the fish, this time blatantly intercut with an image of Junpei, making the connection even clearer. If we look at Junpei here, it at first just seems like a cool image of him with his familiar, but look at how the jellyfish is positioned. Not central, but instead with his tentacles overlapping with Junpei from behind, almost like a distant embrace. This might be a reference to how the jellyfish and Junpei's knowledge of cursed energy are a gift given to him by Maito's kindness. But it isn't just a normal hug. This is an embrace from a deadly creature, one whose mere touch is enough to kill. Very reminiscent of how Junpei meets his end. This connection is completed when the fish balloons and floats up, the same way Junpei does after being affected by Mahito's soul manipulation. This brings Yuji grief, which in turn causes Sukuna to laugh with glee, just like in the manga, which ends up turning this entire scene into a recreation of Junpei's demise from the manga, which I find super cool. Next, we get a couple of cool action shots that are, again, mostly there to just show how fucking cool these characters and the setting are. There is still some meaning here, like how Nanami descends for his attack, symbolizing his descent from a well-paying normal job into the profession of a deranged demon hunter, a descent that nonetheless brings positives, as he slays this dangerous beast. We also get to see Gojo use the reverse technique Red Glow, which looks amazing. It almost resembles fireworks, and I cannot wait to see it in the actual episode. If you can't tell, I am so fucking hyped for this anime. It's actually insane. I haven't been this excited about a series like this in a while. But anyway, let's keep moving. I don't want to just derail this, so yeah. Next, we get a glimpse of our antagonists, as the camera zooms through both Jogo and Hanami looking grimly into the camera. You can see that the setting is actually a mix between their abilities, since the general landscape seems to be volcanic, like Jogo's abilities, specifically his Coffin of the Iron Mountain. And over here we get a cherry blossom tree, reminiscent of Hanami's plant-based abilities. This next bit will be my first piece of criticism. I don't like the way it just fade transitions into Dagon. These three are a team, and while Dagon is easily the least important member, I still think a continuous shot for the three of them would have been better. The transition is just too sudden in my opinion. Maybe the camera could have zoomed past Jogo here to show Dagon's pond in the far back, but oh well, it's not a big deal, something I noticed. Also, I do find it funny that Dagon is named after the Lovecraftian terror of the sea, and yet is made to look this goddamn cute in the OP. It's the sort of playfulness I really appreciate from a production. You can tell that people are having fun with it. We get another somewhat awkward hard cut into the unsuspecting and dutifully mask-wearing public, learn from this, being transformed into husks by the ranged and cocky Mahito. This transition is quite sick, and I really like how demented he looks here. The blood he licks forming a sort of grotesque lipstick, amplifying just how terrifyingly malleable and undefinable he is, something that is also presented by the way he just appears without no one being able to predict it. Now, this next transition is not only super cool, but also the most surprising and boldest reference in the OP. We travel through Maito's eye, where a disembodied arm cuts us to Nobara gearing up to a fight. This wouldn't be all that crazy if it weren't for the fact that just recently in the manga, Nobara squared off against Maito's clone in the streets of Shibuya. We have already established the night shots to be around Shibuya, and the way we travel through Maito's eye does evoke the imagery of the soul link he has with his clone, like he's simultaneously seeing this street full of husks and Nobara preparing to nail him. I can't decide if this is an actual reference or if I've just lost my mind because I've been scripting this in the middle of the night, but regardless, cool stuff. We get another montage of cool shots that show off the cast and their general fighting styles, including the funniest piece of animation I've seen all year. Among these cool shots, we get a few noteworthy ones. Yuji spending time with Junpei, Maito learning domain expansion, and Nobara as a kid watching what seems to be Saori, for example. But the next properly rich shot comes when Yuji is seen resisting the pressure of the cursed womb. Besides just being a phenomenally animated shot, it is also intercut with a shot of Yuji's grandfather watching him contently. The cool thing about this shot reveals itself once you look at Yuji's hair. It is actually not completely clear if this is supposed to be the front of his head or the back. The little bit of color here could be both his skin or the undercut of the back on his head under a bit of lighting. This creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is a literary scholar's best friends because we don't have any other friends. If we say that this is the front of Yuji's head, then that means that Grandpa here is behind him. Since this shot is obviously meant to be associated with this one here, one could interpret it as Yuji's grandpa and the memory of him giving Yuji the strength he needs to fight through the womb's blast. However, if we say that this is the back of Yuji's head, then that means that Grandpa is in front of him, making his position congruous with the origin of the blast that is tearing Yuji apart. This might be counterintuitive, but remember, it was his grandfather's last words and death that catalyzed Yuji into the self-destructive path of a death row inmate turned sorcerer. The ideological turmoil brought about by his granddad's death is quite literally the force of nature that Yuji has to resist and overcome if he hopes to truly understand what a good death is. Regardless of how viable you think either of these interpretations are, I do think it looks more like the front of his head than the back, but I still really like this shot since it lends itself to some juicy thought experiments, so whatever, we're young, we can do this, come on. The next few shots are pretty straightforward. It shows a vision of the guys hanging out with Junpei, the bliss that could have been. This pleasant dream is quite literally glitched away as Sukuna manifests atop his malevolent shrine and looks down at Yuji as he always does, with Yuji reciprocating with grim determination. We see Sukuna's finger fall into the water and sprout a plant, which is symbolic of how Sukuna literally plants himself into Yuji, awaiting his full incarnation, his full blooming, so to speak. The OP ends with Yuji falling asleep again in the train as Sukuna's influence once again fades. This mirrors the start to a T and actually makes the OP loopable. But I think there is a second potential reading here. At the start, we talked about how the train and the water symbolize Yuji being swept and carried away by forces outside of his control, a situation someone would naturally want to resist and avoid. However, after a montage of Yuji's friends and their endeavors, he accepts that this is how it is and, instead of rebelling, chooses to, this time, trust his comrades to fight on and wake him up when he is needed. Yuji's kindness and trust in the people around him is a big part of his character, so I think reading it like this reinforces that, which is nice. Albeit this is a bit wonky considering that Yuji is a bit of a rebellious spirit by himself, but we'll figure it out. But anyway, yeah, that's it. Overall, a super good opening song that manages to be entertaining, meaningful, and intriguing without spoiling anything overtly. Also, one neat detail is that many of the locations we see in the montage are actually directly taken from real places around Tokyo and Japan in general, which does wonders in adding a touch of setting and a place to these shots. Additionally, it showcases some gorgeous use of CGI and some equally beautiful background art, which other anime could learn from. Do you hear me, MHA? You and your coffee stain looking ass walls? Disgusting. Anyway, hope y'all had fun. This was very spontaneous. I swear I'm working on the next Naruto review, but when I saw this OP I just knew I had to do this. I am tired, exhausted, and slightly manic, but that's alright because I love you guys. Thanks for sticking with my nonsense. As always, like and sub and ring the bell if you liked it. Patreon, Twitch, and merch exist. I love you in only the most borderline homosexual way. Take care, be safe, see you around, bye bye.